Hi, everyone. Okay, I think a few more people will be popping in, but we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming this afternoon to our talk on VR and cultural competency. This webinar is hosted by the USC Smart VR Center, which is funded by the USC Office of Research. To learn more about our center and our events, see our website at smartvr.usc.edu or follow us on Twitter at USC_SmartVR. Joining us today will be Ilin Misaras, Associate Director at the Global Training Initiative at North Carolina State University, Matt Foreman, the lead developer at REM5 Studios, and our host, Dr. Laura Garcia, who is filling in for Mariantina Gatzis. Dr. Garcia is the Director of Clinical Design at Found. And with that, we can begin with Ilin Misaras.
Thank you, Kira. So let me go ahead and start sharing, and I'm hoping this will work out. So, all right, this is slideshow mode. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you guys. I'm very excited about talking to talk to you about the work that we're doing as far as global cultural competency at North Carolina State University. It's a topic that I just love talking about. So I've given Kira permission to mute me if I go way over my time, and really looking forward to the Q&A as well. So as far as global cultural competency in VR, what you're seeing is it's a picture of our incoming MBA students. And they do this every year in their orientation. And, they're one of the target audiences that we were trying to reach. But, one of the things that we had wanted to do as a global training initiative was find a way to teach about cultural competency in a way that was engaging for students. Now, some students are already naturally engaged. They love talking about it. They want to learn more. A lot of other students, you start talking about it and their eyes kind of glaze over. It's like, okay, let's figure out a way to engage this group. So about 6 years ago in 2016, we worked very closely with, it's called Digital Learning Technologies Applications. It's another unit on campus, and they were giving out these grants to faculty, staff, and units to find ways, new innovative ways to teach, whatever your subject is, utilizing new technologies. And so we applied for the grant, told them, hey, we want to do something in VR. There was another faculty member in the College of Education at the time who was also interested in doing it. So we applied for the grant together. And we really worked on, well, what can we do? What is something that would be fun, exciting, and a fun way for us to teach about global skills and cultural competency? And so ultimately, what we came up with, and I'll show you snippets of it, is something called First Impressions. And we've been using it since 2017. So since I'm on the other coast, I wanted to introduce North Carolina State University to you guys a little bit. So we were founded back in 1887. We are part of the UNC system of schools. So we're one of 16 public universities across North Carolina. And the other thing is that we are also one of the land grant universities. And so part of our mission is also to help better the lives of the citizens of North Carolina. So the VR modules that we utilize, not just for the student populations, but we've actually utilized it with organizations, government officials, companies located here in the Research Triangle region. So we have 12 colleges at NC State, a little over 35,000 students. And it's important to note that these students are from all 100 counties in North Carolina, as well as we've had representation from all 50 states and more than 120 countries. In fact, we have more than 4,000 international students on campus right now. That's important because our unit specifically falls under the Office of Global Engagement. So we're not in a specific college. We actually work kind of with everyone. And so I won't go through all that, but the main reason I want to show you our 12 colleges is that our College of Agricultural and Life Sciences and our College of Engineering are our two primary colleges. And so more than half the population, the student population, is in one of those colleges. And that was kind of the problem statement that we had coming into, developing this VR module. We've got such a wide range of students, as far as we've got those who have traveled the globe, maybe come from a different country, their families grew up in a different country and they've come here, to those who have never left the state of North Carolina. So when it comes to teaching about global differences, cultural differences, how do you have a conversation when there are such different lived experiences? And so that's one of the I guess, challenges that we were trying to tackle with this VR. And so I'm going to take a step back and talk a little bit about, when I'm talking about cultural competence, this is sort of the model we follow. So a lot of us in the GTI we've been certified by various organizations. And for the most part, this is kind of the model of cultural competence that's out there. You start with an open attitude, right? You want to learn about a different culture, a different way of thinking, a different way of living. And then eventually, hopefully, you get to a point where there's some self-awareness. These are some of my preferences. This is what I would like to do. These are my beliefs. These are my values. And then you can always compare that with others, right? And hopefully in a culturally knowledgeable way. And then eventually, once you kind of are rooted and grounded in that, you can develop some cultural skills to help you bridge that gap. But of course, it's a continuous cycle. So we're not saying that you do our VR module, you come out grade A certified, culturally competent, you're ready to go conquer the world. It's a starting point, right? And it's a starting point for wherever you need it. Sometimes people need to be forced into the open attitude or at least start exploring that. Other times it's more cultural knowledge. Oh, this is interesting. I didn't know this. I want to explore more. So that's what we're hoping to do with VR because it's engaging, it's interesting. We'd like for people to be somewhere on this wheel and continue the cultural competence exploration. And then the other sort of primary model that we work with as far as culture is that culture is an iceberg. And so our definition, the working definition we go with, is that culture is a learned and complex set of ideas, emotions, behaviors, and symbols that are expected, reinforced, and rewarded by a particular group. So as we know, I think you guys have all seen this model of the iceberg before. A lot of behavior, right? It's something we can see, but we always view behavior through our own cultural lens, right? If I see someone doing something, I'm going to interpret it based on my understanding, based on my beliefs, assumptions. And a lot of times, you can sometimes see what someone's beliefs and assumptions are, but what goes really deep under the surface are core values. And until you really start engaging with someone in conversation about, well, that's interesting why you do this, can you explain a little bit more? And we don't always have that opportunity, but, we don't always get a chance to explore the core values that drive that behavior until there's really sort of meaningful engagement. And so we always highlight that some of the times when we have cultural clashes, it's really when the assumptions and expectations kind of come into conflict with each other, right? There's an expectation I had, it wasn't met. What's going on here? And so, it's really interesting for us to explore that on a deeper level. And we found that VR was a great way to really immerse someone in a setting and really immerse someone. Uh, you know, the immersive technology was really helpful in terms of getting them to experience some of the same things. And then when they came out of it, we could actually talk about what was this cultural exchange? Why did this person behave this way? Why did they perhaps, respond this way? So that was the model we went with and why we why we developed the VR module the way we did. And so very quickly, I'm going to play this video while I cough. Excuse me. This is kind of the brief glimpse of what First Impressions is.
If everyone could please look at the schedule that Kip and I worked on, and after you've had a chance to review it, let us know your thoughts. Sound good?
We have spent the last 2 hours discussing nothing but business.
Did that sound come through okay? I just wanted to make sure. Okay, great. So again, I think you saw very briefly, and I'm sorry, I couldn't find sort of the full clips. There are 2 scenes in this module where the first one, you're sort of a fly on the wall. And then you kind of start observing what's happening. And I'll give you the background story. There we go. So these are the characters that you saw very briefly in the background story to what's happening in this module. So the first scene, they're just starting to meet. These are new business partners. They're coming together for the first time to talk about a fairly large, $1 billion World Bank project. And as you're a fly on the wall, you start kind of observing, okay, there's some things happening. It's not going great. There's not a great start to the meeting. And you sort of pause at a point, and then we have everyone come out of the headset and talk a little bit about, what did you see happening there? What did you think was going on? What are some of the cultural differences you might anticipate? And then the kind of magic that happens in scene two, actually, you get to dive into someone's head. So you actually become that person for the second scene. And that allows you to experience the rest of the scenario in that person's mind. So you hear his thoughts, right? And you actually see his reactions to things that are happening as well. And so that's been really fun because it's interesting when students become one of the characters. It's they tend to I don't know if you call it like inhabit that character, but when they come out of that headset, they start responding to things as if they were that character. They'll come out and they'll be like, you know what, you were really rude to me. Like I can't believe you did that. I mean, they actually like I said, I don't know a better word than inhabit, but they really start empathizing with that character. And so one of the things that I remember, there was a young engineering student who came out of the headset and he said, that's maybe not the way I would have acted or what I would have said in the meeting, but I get where he's coming from. And that was kind of the lightning moment for us. Like, oh, this is actually a really good tool as far as building empathy, right? Understanding other perspectives, because you literally get to dive into someone's head and you get to experience life, or in this case, a business meeting, through the eyes of another. And of course, spoiler alert, the meeting does not go well. And so you kind of get to see a lot of the cultural faux pas that happen in various business settings. Of course, unfortunately, they kind of happen all at once in this one business meeting. And so when you come out the second time, you really start having that discussion of, well, why did you do it this way? Why did you say this? Why didn't you say this? And so you really start having those conversations about, kind of deeper level what's going on there. And so the format that we like to have for the students, and I'm just showing you guys a couple of behind the scenes here, because back in 2016, and also remember, we're a state university, so we don't have a Hollywood budget. We had to figure out how to shoot this from a first person perspective. Like, how do you do VR 360 video in, first person? And so what you can maybe see kind of the top right corner there, that's the rig that the genius that is Mike Wallace came up with. He just stuck, I think, like 6 GoPro cameras together. And it kind of worked. It worked pretty well. Like I said, when people come out of it, you really feel like you've been that character. So, and I think you saw maybe part of that clip where the scene went a little bit fuzzy, and then you heard the person's comments. And so that's where we did some audio voiceovers. And then this is one of the earliest, I think, pilots that we did with some of the younger engineering students about utilizing this module. And so, it was really fun to put it together. And the main thing is, when we go through this, one of the basic things that we do is to really tease out what are the behaviors you saw and what are the beliefs, the assumptions, and values that are driving that. And to do it in as non-judgmental a way as possible, because that's really hard. Like I said, we always see things through our cultural lens, and we all often make snap judgments, which, everyone does it. But if you can maybe step back from that and tease that out, that becomes really helpful. So there's something at the very beginning where the Indian gentleman comes in, he's on his phone and he's wrapping up a phone meeting with a business partner. But, when the students first come out, they go, well, he was just really rude, or, he was making a power play, he was trying to take control of the meeting. When you can step back and think, okay, well, the behavior is that he came in, he was talking on his phone. Sometimes the students will say, well, he was late. That's extremely rude. Okay, well, that's a judgment statement. Let's, that's because you value starting meetings on time. You have a more fixed view of time. And so maybe for him, he's not late. Maybe for him, he's valuing the relationship he has with the business partner. So he's trying to wrap that up, and not be rude to the business partner. And then as soon as he's done, he will give you his full undivided attention. So you see them kind of step back and go, oh, okay, well, I guess, that's one way of explaining it. And so that's kind of what we try to do throughout the entire module. There's these sort of teachable moments where you can step back and think, okay, I, see this behavior as, unacceptable or rude or condescending, but let's step back and see if there's something deeper under the surface. There's some beliefs, assumptions, and values that are maybe driving that behavior that we can talk about. And so that later, if it is something that I don't like, that's not my preference, how do we then find those cultural skills to bridge that gap? Either I change my behavior a bit, or perhaps we have a conversation, set expectations, right? Set clear expectations, and then move forward from there. So this is, kind of part of what we do in our module. And we're really proud that, in 2018, when we started rolling this out, we received a couple of awards for it and started receiving some recognition. And we are now starting to do more of this training with a lot of our undergraduate student populations. When it first rolled out, it was kind of graduate students, especially the MBA students. I think they really saw the value in learning some of these cultural skills. But now, hopefully we're able to roll it out more widely across the university. So a lot of initial success. And so then when we really had a question about how effective is this VR in terms of teaching cultural competence. So we started partnering with, it was the 4D lab in our Department of Psychology. And we wanted to figure out, well, is it the VR? Is it the immersive reality that's really engaging and helpful in terms of helping these students see and understand and empathize with these characters? Or is it just, we have an awesome curriculum, I wrote an awesome, scenario, and this is really the magic. So we're about to test it out. And so you can see on the left, or my left, we cartoonified the scenario. And so you can kind of see, okay, one group would just read the cartoon and then, we'd still do the training the same way. But then the other group would, another group would have watched the video and another group would have had the full immersive VR scenario. And so you can kind of see the difference, right? The cartoon versions, you can still see the look on their face, like, what are you doing? But it's definitely different when you're in the headset and you see there's Koshal and Tony. I don't know if you can see that clearly, but they're kind of giving Kip a look like, what are you doing? So again, there's really more of an emotional reaction when you're in the VR headset. And so we were super excited to get this started, got the IRB approval. We were ready to go, started scheduling all the workshops spring 2020. And we all know what happened spring 2020, right? To borrow the phrase from Chinua Achebe, things fell apart. I mean, things fell apart really quickly. And so this is on hold, until things get better. So hopefully soon, we're knock on wood, maybe in the fall, we can resume this again. But yeah, I mean, I think our world shifted so rapidly. We didn't do as many of these VR sessions, obviously, in the first part of the pandemic when we were all locked down because not everyone has a VR headset. We started doing a little bit more in the last semester, the last year or so. It's really difficult getting people to come in, social distance, the cleansing process. It's still not the same as, if hopefully when things go more back to normal. So we hope to resume this in the fall, and hopefully we can resume this research project as well. It's definitely an answer we'd like to see. So anyway, like I said, things fell apart, and it wasn't just the pandemic, right? There was a lot of stuff that just happened. And I think there was a lot of soul searching that we did in the GTI as far as, wow, how can we do something, that matters, that maybe helps move the conversation forward, as far as being more productive and talking about differences and embracing each other's differences. What can we do? Knowing that this technology that we've utilized to help teach about cultural differences and to really help participants, develop some empathy for the characters and develop some understanding and start learning some perspective taking. How can we possibly utilize this in another setting? And so that's when a different opportunity came up where we actually applied for the North Carolina Governor's Crime Commission grant, and we received it. And so we're actually working on this right now, where we're going to develop, or we are developing, VR modules for the law enforcement community, specifically dealing with minority communities. And the first community that we decided to work with is the law enforcement community and obviously the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx communities, because it's a growing population here in North Carolina. And so it's one that we also have a lot of connections with as far as people that we work with, et cetera. And so that was kind of one of the first groups that we wanted to work with. And so I'm going to show you a clip, and I need to, I think, exit out of this. So we just wrapped production on this like a couple weeks ago, and they're deep in post-production now, but they did want me to at least show you. There's two scenarios that we chose to I guess, play out in VR. One was a traffic stop, and that's because we had heard from our various advisory teams, that is a very common occurrence, and there's a lot of possibilities there where there might be misunderstandings. So that's one of the ones that we wanted to start with. And I'm just going to show you a brief clip, and let me know if either the sound or something is not going well.
¿Por qué? ¿Pero por qué? ¿Qué pasó? No sé, te dije que pararas.
Cálmate,
¿Cómo puede
cálmate.
ser? ¿Por qué no parece mi cabeza? Ya se llevan una casa 2 semanas.
No nos va a llevar
¿Cómo que
nadie.
pare? Mamá, quédense tranquilos. Está atacando la llevada. Está atacando.
¿Qué hiciste? Le dije a César que parara. Tranquilo, güey, chale. Tenemos que llegar a trabajar. Y no podemos dejar que se lleven la troca.
Me van a regresar para atrás. No puedo regresar. Chingado, no quiero.
Chinga, ya no vamos a salir de esta.
So this is kind of a rough cut of just one part, and we haven't gotten into their heads yet, but that's kind of the next thing that's coming up. I do want to credit, obviously, we're working with several other groups in terms of the production of this, and so Redfern LLC and Lever Studios are the ones that are doing the actual production. But as far as what we did with this grant program, this grant project, first, we did convene both advisory teams for the Latino, Latinx, Hispanic population, as well as the police. And so we spent a lot of time kind of, again, doing the research, talking to folks about what are the pain points, right? What are the things that we want to address? What would you like to see? And then, of course, a lot of it was pre-production. We just wrapped up production, including all the rehearsals and filming. And so we're currently in post-production and curriculum development as well. The idea behind this is that this will be training that will be delivered by the Department of Justice, as well as the police training academies, where I think we're still trying to figure out what it is. Now, I included a QR code so you guys can view this on your phone, because this part can be done in 360, but I'm also going to play it here. And this is sort of scene 2 as far as what's going on. And like I said, they're still deep in post-production, so...
¡Carajo! Yo soy el que trabaja aquí y la Lupe vaya a la escuela porque yo lo digo.
Sheriff's Office. ¿Sí?
Ma'am, we're responding to a call.
María, dile que todo está bien, por favor, que estúpida. ¿Quién llamó a la policía?
I know speak English. Ma'am, is there someone here who does speak English?
Mi amor. Lupita, no le digas nada. Que María, dile, por favor, no involucres a nuestra hija. Diles.
Sir, I'd like you to step outside.
No, it's okay.
Step outside.
No se llena a mi marido.
No, it's okay. Please, it's okay. No.
Ma'am, you need to come inside and talk.
I know speak English.
María, dile que todo está bien, por favor, que estúpida. ¿Quién llamó a la policía?
Ma'am, is there anyone here who speaks English?
María, Lupe, por favor, no digas nada. María, dile, por favor, no involucres a nuestra hija.
Ma'am, can we come inside and talk?
No, por favor. It's okay. No se llena a mi marido. Can you just tell your mom? I just want to talk to her for a minute. Que mamá dice que solo quiere hablar contigo.
So those are sort of the two primary scenarios that we heard from actually both communities, that these are common occurrences. Let's really dive into this and sort of explore this more in detail. So we continue to work on a curriculum and finding a way, because obviously the law enforcement community is a very different target audience than we're used to teaching. And so we are working very closely. There's several folks that we're involved with that do a lot of training for law enforcement. And I'm getting the time thing. So anyway, I just wanted to show you guys this really quickly. And if you have questions, please feel free. I'd love to talk more about it. So to sum up, these two main projects that we've been working on really kind of, again, are sort of the entryway as far as, where are you in this cycle of developing your cultural competence? how can we help you with this? How are ways that we can facilitate conversations for you to learn, to take other perspectives? And also, once you figure out where some of your cultural preferences are and where maybe other cultural preferences are, how are ways that we can bridge that gap? And so, we can utilize this in different contexts. We have a business context, now we have one with law enforcement, but we also foresee that, we can use this in a lot of different environments, scenarios. So we're hopefully just getting started with this. I'm excited to show you guys kind of what we've worked on so far, but we hope to continue to do more. So thank you very much. I'll stop share.
Great, thank you so much, Ilin. Next, we have Matt Foreman presenting on REM5 Studios.
All right, I'll share my screen here. One moment. All right, thumbs up if you guys can see this. Perfect. All right, so my name is Matt Foreman. I'm lead developer of REM5 Studios. I'm actually a self-taught VR developer. I, funnily enough, used to be a mechanical engineer, but I wanted to do something a little more creative, yet still technical. I learned how to develop games using free online resources. I recently got my MBA from Carlson at the University of Minnesota, and I really became interested in how VR could change the world in positive ways. I had met Amir and Brian at REM5, and really liked what they were doing with training and cultural competence and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ended up joining forces with them. So a little bit about REM5. We are a vertically integrated technology company, immersive tech company, and we kind of have three facets to our business. The first is REM5 Virtual Reality Laboratory, and that is our brick and mortar facility near Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're one of the largest VR facilities in the world. And another facet to our business is REM5 for Good. And this is where we deploy XR, things, videos, software for impact and social change. And lastly is REM5 Studios. And this is a full service XR agency where we both develop and serve content that's developed by others as well. And we've worked with 35,000 plus individuals since our launch. And most of the time, the people we're putting in headsets are first time VR users. So we have a pretty good advantage in terms of user experience and what really makes things easy when someone puts on a headset for the first time. So just want to talk about kind of where REM5 comes into this, where we saw a big issue and thus an opportunity was the gap between VR creators and the users of VR. So really the VR hardware manufacturers and content creators have a hard time connecting with DEI educators and facilitators, corporations, nonprofits, schools, and community groups. And so that's where we kind of come in, and we're able to host people at REM5 and bring them in for various training sessions, work with them to build VR experiences and immersive experiences, not just VR, but could be in a browser as well. So a little bit about DEI industry evolution. It's a $10 billion industry in the US. The effectiveness of those dollars is somewhat questionable, but there has been some meaningful shifts in the past few years. Namely, check the box initiatives are being called out. And with a primarily millennial workforce, companies are actually starting to be held accountable. So executive compensation is even tied to diversity goals in some cases. And hopefully that's led by an HR team that knows what they're doing. So there are also DEI leaders moving into executive roles. And this is a good change to see. And also return on investment buy-in, because diversity is actually a competitive advantage. Despite it being the right thing to do, companies perform better financially if they are diverse. But there's still a lack of innovation and a lot of challenges that have come up due to COVID. So where VR fits into all this is, one, the engagement. When someone puts on a headset, they're fully immersed and we're able to captivate the audience and also serve them a novel experience that they're able to discuss with their peers. And secondly, we can democratize experiences, meaning that we're able to bring an experience that someone wouldn't normally have to a large amount of people easily and in a safe way. So we think that VR essentially can be used to build a meaningful foundation for discussion. So the first thing I want to highlight is One City, Two Realities. And this is our most popular WebXR exhibition. We've deployed it with many Fortune 500 companies. It's cross-platform, PC, mobile, and VR. Most people don't use it in VR, they use it in a web browser, but it allows people, 20 to 40 people to meet and have a facilitated discussion. And really, they can look in sort of this museum space. And this one focuses on Minneapolis, the racial inequities and systemic racism that exists and kind of what led up to that. And really, it's just a good visual way for people to grasp what's going on, and tends to really surprise people and humble people. And usually we bring in facilitators because we realize that we don't always have the capacity to speak about these things in-house, and we need to bring in the right people to help facilitate some of these discussions. And also, this picture on the right, we use live message boards. We use usually a service called meet.ps, and this allows people to have sort of a silent reflection and discussion time where they can be in the space and still pull out their phones and have a meaningful discussion and post messages and just really reflect on what they just saw and heard. And the second thing I want to highlight is steps of privilege. So this, if you've done the privilege walk in person before, the concept of this is probably nothing new. For those who don't know, the privilege walk is sort of this activity where people line up, could be in a soccer field, and there's a moderator. They say something along the lines of take one step forward if you always knew you'd go to college, take one step back if you grew up with one parent, and so on. And it just really makes the nuances of privilege clear and how it sets people forward and backward in life. And we decided to essentially bring this experience into virtual reality. So Steps of Privilege is a safe space to explore the nuances of privilege. It runs on the Oculus Quest 1 and 2. Usually when we have people come in person, we do 10 to 20 users at a time, but we are gearing up for a public launch. And we are able to collect data and actually even collect voice recordings for reflections with people's permission. And the idea is to inform people, and then after they take off the headset, have a facilitated discussion and really reflect on how they can empower people and how privilege affects that. So why did we want to bring this to VR? So in person, the privilege walk has a few disadvantages because it exploits the stories of others, and really you feel kind of judged by your peers for the steps you're taking forward and backwards. So when someone puts on the VR headset, they are in a judgment-free space, and other people are not exploited or forced to tell their stories. We actually have animated avatar characters next to you that each have their own story, and they take steps forward and backward. And we found that people do actually connect and empathize with these characters. And this is a fail-safe environment where people can really kind of reflect on themselves, and it's pretty introspective. And if they fail, they're not going to get judged by anyone. And VR is also found to generate more empathy than traditional training. So I just want to do an overview of what this experience actually is and how it works. So first of all, you get into VR and you're able to select your own skin tone so that you feel like yourself in VR. One issue that I personally notice a lot as a VR developer is white skin tone hands on VR experiences. And really that's just a lack of thoughtfulness of the developer, because if you don't have a white skin tone, you're really not going to feel welcome in this experience. So we want people to feel like themselves, and they can select their own skin tone. And after kind of a short introduction to warm people up and they're able to rate their own privilege prior to the experience. And this is just to kind of get them starting to think about, you know, how things like social class, age, physical ability, race, gender identity, sexual identity, religion, and education affect privilege. And then next we do introductions, and really this just is to allow people to warm up to the characters. And we found that in this stage of the experience, people begin to make assumptions, and more on that later, but these assumptions will be challenged. So each character tells a little bit about themselves, and then you're actually asked to speak out loud and introduce yourself. And again, this is to help you actually accept these characters as real people. So then the actual walk, participants listen to 20 statements read by a moderator. For example, one of the statements is, if an authority figure first assumes you were breaking rules when you've done nothing wrong, take a step backward. And 20 questions similar to that. And about at the halfway point, you're asked to reflect on your position versus others in the room. And at the very end of the walk, you can actually hear each character's story. And it's at this point where people have, we've gotten feedback that they were like, wow, we really didn't expect that about this person. I jumped to an assumption about them when I first saw them and they introduced themselves. So it really gets you to kind of realize that your assumptions that you may have made about someone or a situation could be very off. And at the very end, you actually are able to listen to reflections in the form of voice audio recordings from people who have been through that experience before you. You can actually just reach out and touch these orbs and they speak, and this tends to be a very powerful part of the experience. People are sharing very emotional reflections, and you're actually given the opportunity to record your own reflection. And then at the very end, you rate your own privilege again. And this tends to usually be different than the first rating after you've done the privilege walk. So in forming this experience, we actually worked with a neuroscience student, Kimney, to do a study on this. And we found that steps of privilege led to a 6.5% increase in cultural competence. 90.8% of people felt that they were engaged the entire time. And that is quite a bit higher than traditional training, where you're doing written reflections and things like that. 85.7% of people felt comfortable throughout the entirety of the experience. And finally, steps of privilege, the ultimate takeaway is that it caused participants to look inward and be more critical of their own understanding of privilege. So just some final thoughts. Corporations are shifting to a systemic approach where they're held accountable and they're looking for new innovations and new tools. You know, DEI is an industry that really hasn't seen monumental innovation until now, where you can actually become immersed in a situation. And not only like what I've talked about, but as you heard previously, it can be used in all sorts of ways, even with real footage of real people. And we found that we really need to meet the users where they are with XR technology. Companies just aren't ready to deploy an entire fleet of VR headsets quite yet. So that's why we deal with WebXR for One City, Two Realities, because people can access it via a web browser. And with steps of privilege, we tend to bring people in to do that experience, although we are about to release it publicly on the Oculus Store and App Lab, and also Viveport for the Vive Focus 3. And that's because we're starting to see the VR market growing, and hopefully we can meet the users there as well. And we found that VR is able to be used to open up paths for meaningful facilitated discussions. People go through this experience and they have a lot to talk about with their peers. And when we do this, we really try to separate the technology from the experience, because we get a lot of first-time VR people in there who are really amazed by the technology, and then that's all they want to talk about. But we actually prep them on that to not really focus on the technology that much. Like, you're likely to be amazed, but we really want you to focus on the experience that you just had. And we're going to continue to work towards fail-safe environments and more dynamic experiences where you can actually interact naturally. And hand tracking is an awesome technology for that, because you don't even have to teach anyone how to do anything. They just put on the headset and they can naturally just use their hands, or in the case of steps of privilege, you're actually physically stepping forward or backwards. And that is all I have. If you want to get in touch with me, please reach out. My door is open. And thank you very much for having me on this panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt and Ilin. This was an amazing workshop. Thank you for your thoughts, for sharing about your work. I'm really excited to guide this discussion moving forward. So I want to make sure that I bring up questions that are important to the audience. So for whoever who has a question or thoughts or suggestions, please share them in the chat. I have a couple of questions. I'll start with those, but yeah, feel free to let me know if you want to discuss something important to you. And I think one of the main questions I had is this idea of cultural competency and how you assess that. So I think, Ilin, you talked about the different stages in cultural competence, and you both talked about sort of the pre-assessment of cultural competence or cultural privilege. And then a post-assessment. So I'm wondering, what are some ways in which we assess cultural competence, and how do we measure the success of these programs?
So since you named me, I'll start. Actually, that is a question I have for Matt as well. It's been our biggest challenge. How do you assess cultural competence? We're still working on that. Actually, the model that we utilize is less of a assessing how culturally competent you are. Really, a lot of the kind of surveys and assessments that we do help put you on a scale of cultural dimensions. So really, it measures more of your preference. And Matt had mentioned things about judgment-free. So, for example, low context communication style, high context communication style. So you take this assessment, you figure out where you fall on that spectrum. And then, if you realize, oh, I'm really low context. Okay, my colleague here is really high context. That's why we've been having clashes. That's why we're not understanding, where it seems like we're speaking different languages. What are some skills where we can bridge that gap? So, whenever we teach this, we always say, it's not that low context is right and high context is wrong. It's different. And especially if you're on the very far ends of the spectrum, you're going to have to work harder to bridge that gap. And so that's kind of how we approach a lot of this. The question of how to assess actual cultural competence, I'm going to toss it to Matt, because I'm really curious how they measure it.
Well, I also think it's very difficult, and that's part of the reason we brought in a neuroscience student to help us do a study. I think one of the scales she used was the IRI scale, Interpersonal Reactivity Index, which is a measure of empathy. And that's not the only way to gauge it. It's really tricky. And a lot of steps of privilege really is just introspective, where someone is reflecting on themselves and their ideas about privilege and things like that. So really how they feel afterwards is also a good measure of that. We found that after doing steps of privilege, people really understand that, wow, they really didn't have as good of an idea about privilege as they thought they did. And so we kind of see that as progress being made towards cultural competence.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I'm glad to hear that this scale is an empathy scale. And it sounds to me that from both of your presentations, empathy and perspective taking really are the foundational blocks for cultural competency. What are some other important foundations for cultural competence, in addition to those two?
I don't know, any thoughts on that?
So I can tell you, for instance, I think Ilin, you talked about cultural knowledge, right? So one part of cultural competency is understanding that everyone might have a different background, and another piece is adapting to those backgrounds, right? So how do you know what to adapt? And I think, Ilin, you talked a little bit about preferences, understanding people's preferences.
Right. So some of that, one of the cultural skills that we take, we call it style switching. And so some of that is where, if I understand that you are communicating in a very or let's just use time. If I understand that you have a very fixed view of time and I'm really fluid, then how I'm going to adapt is maybe set my alarm a little bit earlier. And I'll give you a real life example of that. My husband is fluid. I am fixed. We would have arguments trying to get to something on time. So what I do now after, 13 years of marriage, I put the event on his calendar for 30 minutes earlier than it really is. And so I know that we are going to be late. My view, late, right? So he just thinks that, the event's supposed to start at 2:30. We're going to be there by 3, right? So that is maybe, that's an adaptation that we did. Now that's kind of a funny example, but there are other ways, which again, if we can start having some conversations, if you know where you are, where the other is, that's where that self-awareness, other awareness is, you can start coming up with strategies about bridging gaps. There's another one where, we had a coworker who was very kind of, she would take deep dives into things as far as, if she were working on something, please don't interrupt her. Whereas some of us were really more kind of multi-focused. So she was very single focused. We were very multi-focused. And so I'm horrible at that. If something pops into my mind, I'm going to go knock on your door. Hey, I just want to check in with you. Can we talk about this? We didn't realize we were driving her crazy. And I feel so bad after we kind of went through this together as a team. And she was like, y'all, I can't, it takes her so long to dive into a topic and then to extract herself just to, entertain my one, little question that just popped into my head. So we worked out a situation where, okay, if something pops into my head, I'm going to write it on a Post-it note. And if her door, I'm going to put it on her door. And so that when she comes out and she's ready to engage, she can look at it and then come talk to me. And I don't have any, I'm multi-focused. I'm, okay, yeah, that's what I want to talk about. But also for me, if I don't put it on that Post-it note, I'm going to forget and I'm not even going to address it, So again, very different work styles, right? Different behaviors. How do you adapt to that in a way that works for everyone and doesn't drive your coworker crazy?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind, I'm not sure it exactly answers the question, but we found that challenging people's assumptions is very important. And if you can actually accomplish that in your virtual experience, that tends to make a lot of progress. For example, in Steps of Privilege, people introduce themselves, they just kind of say where they're from and what their position is. And that combined with their appearance causes people to form their own assumption and fill in the gaps. And it ends up being very incorrect. For example, you'd never know that one of the characters struggles with mental health and has to hide that from all of their peers so that it doesn't affect their job title or get them fired. Or for example, you would never assume that someone has to, from their appearance or their introduction, you would never assume that someone is discriminated against for being gay. So we tend to form situations where we can challenge people's assumptions and really get them to understand that they can't jump to conclusions all the time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So yeah, in addition to the empathy perspective taking, it sounds like adaptability, making sure you sort of work through people's preferences and find a positive medium to work with them. And like you're saying, Matt, challenging our own assumptions and doing that in a safe space. And I think both of your programs and both of your experiences really provide that safe space for people to be willing to challenge their own assumptions, because it's not easy to learn that we're wrong, or that for the longest we've been making the wrong assumption. So I think that reducing sort of those defenses from people and making it a safe experience, I think that's super powerful and important. And
sure.
what's interesting too, and what I love the most about both of these experiences is that I would sort of call them transcendental experiences. Particularly, I think, Matt, yours, it's a little bit more experiential in nature because you are having people walk and sort of moving the space and then reflecting on the experience of seeing people at different distances from themselves. So I thought that was really fascinating. And I'm curious, what are some of the long-term effects that you expect people may have from these experiences? I don't know if either of you has looked at what happens to these users a week after this experience, or even months after this experience. how are they sort of incorporating this experience into their own narratives?
Well, the ability to measure retention is sort of difficult for us as we have limited resources. And I'm sure that is the same cry of a lot of other companies as well. But really, we see it as a jumping off point for people to be empowered to actually have these sort of discussions. They go through this experience, they're given a little time to kind of reflect silently to themselves, and then they can kind of come together with their peers. And for some of them, maybe it's the first time they've talked about some of this. So at the very least, their mind is open to being receptive to these new ideas.
Right. And similar with us, we haven't really done like a longitudinal study. We haven't followed these folks afterwards. But that's really interesting. I'm writing it down. I'm going to pass it on to our research team as something to tackle next. Like Matt said, we do hope it's a starting point where, when you are able to sort of walk in someone else's shoes for even just a little bit of time, you realize, oh, that's a very different way of looking at things or interpreting this. And, I might have heard, yes, there's cultural differences, people from this country do it this way, people from that country do it another way. But until you're in their head and you hear their thoughts and understand their reasoning, it doesn't quite make sense to you, right? But then, when you do experience the world through someone else's eyes, all of a sudden you realize, oh, okay, this person isn't being rude or irrational. Actually, there's a very logical reasoning behind the way he's interpreting this or he's thinking this. And so, you have both kind of that cognitive realization, but there's also that emotional connection as well. A lot of times, like I said, people come out and they'll see, someone who's in another person's head and go, "You're a jerk. Like, I can't believe you even said that." There's a real visceral sort of reaction to that. And I think that combination is really helpful, like Matt said, in terms of retention, right? And of course, the things that we are teaching are not groundbreaking in the sense that, they're hopefully easy to talk about. And we're hoping that we're giving our students and the other participants a framework that they can use later on. So, we just cover some very basic things. I think I mentioned, communication styles, view of time. Those are two really, I think, key ones that we come into conflict with a lot just in our daily living. And so if you have that framework, then maybe you can start talking about it with other folks. Or at least we hope that's the case.
Yeah, and just to add, as just sort of an all-encapsulating thing as far as retention goes, VR is proven to increase retention. There have been many studies that have been done. I don't have them off the top of my head, but a quick Google search and you'll find a lot of the proof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you both. And yeah, I'm with you. VR is powerful. And one of the reasons why it's so powerful is not just because of the immersion, but the embodiment. And I think you both are playing with that. What would it be like to be someone else for a moment? And like you're saying, Ilin, it really does change people's perspectives, even beyond the headset. So that's why I really was curious about the long-term effects, because yeah, I may today be someone in VR with these experiences. Could I look at the world after these differently? Because now I feel like I'm more connected to this persona or this new idea of the self. So super fascinating. I know we have a couple of minutes left. I really just want to make sure to open up the discussion if anyone else has another question. Oh, looks like someone has a question. So we have a question from David. He's wondering how VR as a medium is leveraged in the law enforcement scenarios. Does the participant get to embody the characters, or is it more of a 360 sort of experience?
A little bit of both. And so we're actually working on that right now, and we're making a couple tweaks. So there will be one portion where I think especially the traffic stop at the beginning, you saw where the four gentlemen in the car, you could hear their thoughts, but then there's going to be a moment where we can kind of jump into their heads, especially as the scene progresses. So similar to First Impressions, where the officer, is going to be asking for papers, and then he realizes, oh, it's a different registration, what's going on here. And so, yes, there will be an opportunity to do that. In the second scene, it is a little bit more fly on the wall. You could see that there just emotionally, there was more emotion in that second scene already. And we wanted to strike a fine balance between, getting too deep into the heads of folks, especially if we needed to do a lot of translation work as well, because again, we're not sure who the participants are. And also because this is different for us, because we're not going to be the ones facilitating this. this is the biggest challenge for us. We're trying to figure out a way to make this as easy as possible in a way for the usual facilitators to do this. And so we're trying to find that right balance, because a lot of what we do in First Impressions is discussion based, right? And a lot of debriefing of cultural scenarios that, again, that happen in the VR experience or that a participant might have on their own. But, you know, I'll say, well, cultural experts, but we're able to debrief that, right? But we can't necessarily guarantee that in this next, in the training for law enforcement. So we're trying to figure it out. And, you know, if it doesn't seem like it's working, we might go back and reshoot a couple things and incorporate more of the first person perspective. But we just don't know yet. So we're trying this first iteration. If it doesn't work, we'll go back to the drawing board.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ilin. And at last, I think, as Albert Einstein once said, learning is an experience and everything else is just information. And I think today our two speakers really spoke about the power of VR in helping people experience not only the world through different eyes, but understand about their own cultural biases, assumptions, and how they can learn more about themselves, about others, and become more culturally competent. So I really want to thank you both for such an amazing workshop. Very cool work that you guys are doing, very inspiring. I really wish you the best and look forward to seeing you both succeed and help people with such an amazing cause. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys very much.
Thank you everyone for participating, and yeah, hopefully you learn a lot through these workshops. See you all soon.